Good morning, Legacy viewers. Today I'm in the Western Cape. The Border Boys Parade at the Dawn Patrol Shell Hole is about to begin, and I will be filming that to make a Legacy video from.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. May I, on behalf of the Cape Western Provincial Dugout of the Memorable Order of Tenants, welcome you all to the 20th Annual Border Campaign Parade and Memorial Service hosted by the dugout at Dawn Patrol Shuttle. The Parade Sergeant Major is Moff Garth Andrews and the Parade Colour Sergeant is Moff Andrew Buster. Before we proceed, please allow me to welcome our keynote speaker, Colonel Retired Louis Skeepers, family members present who have lost loved ones during the border campaign, members representing various veterans organizations, and members from the MOFWA. It is really good to see so many of you here today, and your attendance is really appreciated. At this point, may I request that you all ensure that your cell phones are either switched off or placed on silent for the duration of the memorial service. Please allow me to thank the following institutions for assistance rendered: the City of Cape Town, especially the City Traffic Department, the medical team, our old friends, the Cape Town Caledonia Pipe Band, the Sea Cadets from TS Voltemada, and last but by no means least, of Grahamstock and the members of Dawn Patrol Shuttle for hosting us all here today. We are gathered here to commemorate the sacrifices made by so many comrades of our generation. Let us commence with the memorial service and in the words of King George V of remembering our glorious dead. The Cape Town Caledonia Pipe Band will now play the hymn, The Battle is Over. When the battle is over. Keynote speaker for today, please allow me to read a short resume. Gunner Louis Skeepers started his military career in January 1906 when he reported at Youngsfield to join 10 Anti-Aircraft Regiment. During the same year, he completed his junior leadership course, and as a second lieutenant, he was appointed as a troop commander in 1977. From 1978 until 1980, he attended the military academy at Saldanha as a lieutenant and completed his studies for a B-Mil degree. Now a captain, 1981 to 1982 saw him posted back to 10 Anti-Aircraft Regiment where he served as battery second in command. 1983 and 1994 saw him serve at 4 Reconnaissance Regiment as a target study officer. In 1985 he was posted back to 10 ACAC and promoted to the rank of major. He served as a period as 101 battery second in command. From 1986 until 1991, he served as anti-aircraft commander as well as the OC of Ops Group 132 Battalion. In 1991 and 1992, he served as the SO1 Ops Group 18 HQ in Johannesburg before serving as the OC of 117 Infantry Battalion from 1992 to 1995. During this time, he attended the Army Staff course in 1993. In 1996, and now as a colonel, he was posted to serve as personal staff officer to the Chief of the Army. For his military service, he was awarded the Military Merit, Pro Patria, Southern Africa, General Service, 20-year and 10-year Good Service medals. Mr. Louis Skeepers retired from active military duty at the end of November 1998. We now call on the keynote speaker, Colonel Retired Louis Skeepers, to deliver his address. Colonel Skeepers.
Thanks for the kind words, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. And if you believe a single word of that, that's on you. Provincial Old Bill Master Derek Perry, members of the Provincial Executive, all moths present, inclusive of the Women's Auxiliary, fellow veterans, shallow supporters, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for the opportunity this morning to address you. I'm honored to be in the presence of veterans. And in this regard, I want to quote General James Mattis, otherwise known as Mad Dog Mattis, four-star general, former commander of the U.S. Central Command, and of course, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense. He said, and I quote, "There is no room for military people, including our veterans, to see themselves as victims, even if so many of our countrymen are prone to release that role." And I thought that is so apt in the time that we live, because we as former soldiers, sailors and airmen and women in South Africa, especially those of us that were members of the post-World War II SADF, are constantly subject to a propaganda narrative that makes us out as defenders of an unjust and indefensible system. Moreover, as we are made out to have been fighting an unjust war, we are collectively blamed for a variety of atrocities of the worst kind, and also having been drummed off the southeast Angolan battlefield in defeat. And of course, that is simply not true. And I say this because, like all of you, or most of you, I was there, and I can tell you that the SADF were no murderers or crooks, thieves or disciples to some ideological cause, but an internationally recognized, professional, highly dignified, well-led, managed, and properly equipped military force involved in the struggle against the global threat at the time. And if you do not agree with me this morning, then you have to explain to me why the Soviet Union invested $4 billion in the Angolan experiment. And deployed with their Cuban brothers more than 45,000 hardcore military personnel organized in brigades and battalions, and eventually taking over the command of the entire Angolan war effort. This is an uncomfortable truth, and it was underlined in 2018 by Mr. Chester Crocker, which was the former U.S. Undersecretary for State for Africa at the time of the Angolan conflict. And he said in a televised interview that Fidel Castro had fabricated the Quito line for his own purpose, to cover up the Angolan and Cuban defeat east of the Quito River, and to provide Castro an opportunity to extricate his Cuban forces from an Angolan hellhole where his Soviet masters left him high and dry by cutting off all financial support towards the end of the war. Helmut Heitmann, which probably all of you know, wrote about this in his book War in Angola, and he said, "The South Africans and UNITA had stopped the FAPLA offensive in the southeast and rolled it back, whilst UNITA exerted enormous pressure on FAPLA and Cuban security forces. And there seemed to be little that could be done to remedy the situation." And in that regard, then, Castro ordered the 50th Division to Angola, and they arrived towards the end of 1987 with the express objective to create an opportunity for him to extricate his forces in there. And they deployed the 50th in the west of Angola, where they got a bloody nose, pushed back, and that was the end of the conflict. And that allowed Cuba to withdraw from Angola with an excuse. So with all of this as background, I intend to briefly share with you this morning a topic that sometimes tend to take a backseat to the real war stories. And that is the background and the build-up to the military campaign in Angola that would lead to the end of hostilities in Angola and Namibia. And I'm going to cover four subtopics. The first one is the geopolitical and strategic environment of the time. The second one is the development of the security situation, especially the build-up in Angola leading to the South African intervention. The key factors that led to the decision and that escalated the conflict. And of course, we'll have a little look at the outcome of it all. Was it worth the while? Firstly, the geopolitical and strategic situation at the time. If we analyze that, we need to understand that the SADF always lived in a grander strategy environment, where where various factors impacted upon them. And if we look at the analysis of the time, there are 4 statements that we need to investigate. The first one was that the Soviets were actually a very serious threat to the region. I'm just going to quote Brezhnev, which said in 1973 that there are 2 goals to the Soviet involvement in Southern Africa. The first one is to gain control of the 2 great treasure houses in the West, i.e. the treasure house of the Persian Gulf oil and the mineral treasure house of Central and Southern Africa. The second goal is to gain a geostrategic advantage in the region to maximize Soviet global influence. And out of that flowed 4 specific aims in Southern Africa. The first one is to expand Soviet influence whilst reducing US and China influence. The second was to establish and maintain Soviet control over the frontline states, to surround South Africa with pro-Soviet nations, to gain access to air and naval facilities in coastal states, to enhance Soviet power projection in the region, and to deny Western access to the strategic minerals of South Africa. That's what Brezhnev said in 1973. In conclusion, the Soviet Union was clear in its goals and strategy for Southern Africa, and that was to take effective control of the region by supplying allied communist governments and revolutionary forces the weapons and advisors they need to take and maintain power, and we saw that. Whilst at the same time, the US and the West was not so clear and clever and direct in denying Moscow its goal. The second statement in assessing the strategic situation was that Angola was really critically important to the Soviets. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but just to say the following. The Soviet prestige was on the line more in Angola than anywhere else in Africa. And that gap was provided by the communist revolution in Portugal, and they moved into the cracks. Since then, the Soviet Union, in other words, since 1975, the Soviet Union has invested in Angola approximately $4 billion US, including worth of arms. That does not include operational costs and other related costs for the war. By 1986, 45,000 plus Soviet bloc and Cuban military personnel, i.e. soldiers. They were not advisors, they were soldiers. They were organized in brigades and battalions, and they were led by Cubans and Russians, were deployed in Angola. The third statement was that South Africa was strategically locked into the deteriorating situation in Namibia. We need to understand that whilst the Namibian situation was developing by the mid-80s, South Africa had its own problems internally as well. So South Africa had to deal with a revolution, if you want to, in South Africa, and it also had to deal with an insurgency in Namibia. And they had to play the one against the other to gain time. So in terms of the Namibian situation, a formidable foe was SWAPO, indeed. And the latter would also have remained insignificant had not Portuguese colonial rule collapsed in Angola. Why do we say that? Because the colonial rule has collapsed, SWAPO was given a place, a strategic base to operate from in Namibia. So the strategic reality was, if SWAPO took over or destabilized Southwest Africa at the time, whether or not Angolan or Cuban troops moved into Southwest Africa, the front line would have shifted south to the Orange River. That was the reality that South Africa had to contemplate with. The fourth statement in assessing the strategic environment was that SWAPO was really a formidable foe. We need to understand that SWAPO, and those of you that met SWAPO on the battlefield will agree with me, SWAPO was a well-trained and equipped and relatively well-led organization in the field. Proof of this statement, and I think this is the asset test, is their tenacity in the field and the will to keep on fighting an obviously superior adversary since the beginning, 1966 odd, to the end. So SWAPO was not easy. So what was the South African strategic approach to the conflict in Namibia and Angola? South Africa, from a strategic point of view, had an objective for Namibia that it wanted it to achieve independence, but not under a communist government. And Whitaker, in a meeting with Chester Crocker, said there should be no doubt that South Africa did not want to have the red flag flying in Quinton. So Leopold Scholz wrote about this, and he said the South African High Command viewed the conflict in Namibia and Angola as follows. The SADF is to create and maintain a stabilized security environment in Namibia within which such a political solution that I've just referred to is possible. SWAPO as a military adversary must be destroyed through aggressive and continued military pressure. And the morale of the surrogate forces, i.e. the Cubans and the Soviets and the East Germans and whoever else, must be broken down so that they are ready to fight and unwilling to meet the South Africans on the battlefield. And the present and the vacuum north of the border at the time needed to be preserved in order to gain time. So, in hindsight, the South African strategy for the Bush War was based on 5 pillars. The first pillar was exceptional intelligence, and those of you that were involved in intelligence operations will know what I'm talking about. The second pillar is to secure own base areas and rear areas by area defense in depth and proactive penetration operations in enemy territory. It basically boils down to the deployment of the sector 10, 20, 30, etc., and the depth defense into Namibia. The third pillar was surgical offensive actions against deep strategic targets by special forces and SAF. The fourth pillar was well-planned and selective offensive external area operations to ensure plan and FAPLA where necessary remain as far away from the Namibian border as possible. And then the fifth pillar, and this is really core to what I want to share with you today, is the strategic and operational support to UNITA as strategic imperative to deny SWAPO any base areas in southeast Angola and to prevent the activation of the Capivi and the Kavango. What I mean by that is UNITA, and we'll talk about this just in a minute, established their base area in the southeastern corner of Angola, and if we could have kept them there, that would have denied SWAPO that area, and the Kavango and the Capivi could not have been activated. That was the real strategic reason why South Africa supported UNITA. And of course there was a lot of other reasons, but that was the key reason. And in order to do this, and one has to take a little bit of a broader view on what I'm going to say now, and with the lessons learned from Operation Savannah, the SADF with Arms Corps embarked on a massive and costly exercise to develop an operational concept and force that was based on the principles of mobility, firepower, and night fighting capability. I want to take you back. Most of you have seen this. Some of you have been involved in the development of that. We developed equipment to support a high mobility concept of operations in the bush. And remember the equipment, the G5, the G6, the Rekat, the Roy Falk, and various other, and equipment that we don't even know about, things like advanced optronics, sights, binoculars, that kind of thing. Signals equipment. It was an integrated and a cognitive effort to develop a high mobility army that could rely on fire support, high level fire support, and mobility and night fighting capability. Somewhere, and I cannot remember when I prepared for this, I could really not remember where I saw it, but I saw a document somewhere in the 80s which laid out the strategy of the army that said we should be ready to have a full-time brigade, which obviously was a National Service Brigade on immediate standby, Citizen Force Brigade on 30 days call-up, and a Citizen Force Brigade on 60 to 90 days call-up, to be organized in a division to be able to fight a conventional fight in 1990. The fight caught up with us in 87. So we were more or less there, and I will tell you a little bit about that just now. So the development of the security situation in southern Angola is important to have a look at, and one can go through a huge list of items, and for the sake of timing I'm not going to go through it all. But we need to understand that in 1975-76, when South Africa intervened in what we know as Operation Savannah, there already were Cubans and Soviets involved in Angola. They didn't get involved because we were there. They were involved there already. So the force build-up just carried on like that. And what is important to understand is that UNITA has decided not to go with a government of national unity. They broke away, you all know the history, and they established themselves in the southeastern corner of Angola. And by 1980, UNITA effectively was a state within a state. And they controlled the southeastern part of Angola. And of course, FAPLA would respond to that. And in 81, there was a first effort to clear that area out, which wasn't effective. And of course, at the same time, and I'm not going to talk about that today, the South African Army started with cross-border operations against SWAPO. You'll remember in 1979 it started, 81 was Protea, etc. In 1982, for the first time, FAPLA organized a conventional force to mop up the UNITA area with a 6th Brigade effort, which was stopped and rolled back by UNITA. 1983 was a key year in the sense that UNITA consolidated their presence in Angola. They controlled the central part and they were starting to work into the northern parts. They even operated in Luanda. To such an effect that FAPLA had to withdraw 8 brigades out of their orbit to protect Luanda. 1984 was another intense year, and then for the first time we saw Soviet-led organization of conventional forces, and UNITA then took a place by the name of Kazombu in the northeast of Angola, then effectively controlled the border between Angola and Zambia. And during that time, we saw a force build up from FAPLA. In 1985, they attacked Mavinga with a two-pronged assault, which was rolled back, and for the first time, the South African Army was given authorization to intervene, and the attack in their Operation Second Congress was stopped by a combined South African force and UNITA, basically consisting out of medical personnel, special forces elements, logistics, the South African Air Force trooping, UNITA, soldiers all over the battlefield, SAF limited close air support, and for the first time a troop of MRLs got involved in the fight and effectively stopped the advance on Mavinga. That was telling, because for the first time the South Africans got directly involved in the fight against FAPLA. In 1986, we saw a massive build-up of forces, and that led to an operation towards the end of the year, Operation Alpha Centauri, where we snuck in a G5 battery and 2 troops of MRLs, if I'm not mistaken, and physically wiped the Whitaker off the map, and that stopped the offense in '86. But we knew that wouldn't be the end. And by the beginning of 1987, we could see that FAPLA was building up towards another offensive, and that led, of course, to the series of operations that we know as Modular, Hooper, and Packet. I'm not here to tell you about all those stories. I just wanted to show you how the force build-up created a situation where the South African Army had no choice but to intervene if they wanted to keep UNITA in place. Remember what I said about the National Servicemen Brigade and the 2 Citizen Force Brigades? This now became reality. So, as a first step in the planning, that brigade minus started to take shape, and it started with 3-2 battalion, where a number of national servicemen subunits were added to the 6th company infantry battalion, and we added a battery of G5s, another troop of MRLs, an anti-aircraft troop, and a squadron of armored cars to 3-2 battalion, which effectively then became a brigade minus or a regiment or whatever you want to call them. Later on, 61 MEC was added to that. Later on, 4 SAR was added to that, and that was the National Servicemen Brigade that I was talking about, and that started the conflict in '87 against FAPLA. So, what was the key factors that led to the decisions to get involved in this? Ongoing intelligence at the time, '87, indicated a renewed effort by FAPLA to dislodge UNITA from its base area. And we saw that was inevitable. And this posed a specific problem to the RSA pertaining to military intervention. Why? High intensity military action means potential heavy losses, and you remember that the old times, minimum losses or nothing. serious diplomatic problems and negative propaganda if we get caught out. If UNITA were defeated and driven from its base area, SWAPO would let loose in that area and the whole purpose would have been defeated. Political problems due to the defeat of UNITA as an ally by the Soviets in Cuba, and the massive Cuban troop presence would now in Angola would now be available for shenanigans in other countries. So those were the considerations of the South African Defence Force when they planned these operations. Military operation intervention on behalf of UNITA projected very little positive impact for the thinkers and for the planners, but the potential outcome of not intervening was so negative that it outweighed the risk of intervention, and that's why we got involved. The RSA government therefore decided to intervene in support of UNITA units, if and where necessary, with the following three provisos. Intervention to be kept as inconspicuous as possible. You remember Savannah, we tried to do that, it didn't work like that. Authorized force levels to be kept to the absolute minimum, and control to be kept as high as possible, or at high a level as possible. Just two remarks. Firstly, the South African contingent in Angola during the height of those conflicts never exceeded 3,000 men, ever. And the question of control that was kept at high levels was a good in principle decision, but it didn't work out on the ground so well. So what was the outcome of it all? Was it worth the while? And before I say this, I need to tell you the icebreaker that I planned to tell before I started with the speech. So there was this young man in the Boer War sitting on a koppie with his grandfather. We called him pen koppie. He was probably 12 or 13 years old. And his grandfather was looking at a number of British troops advancing, and he saw there's big problems coming on. And the young kid said to his grandfather, "Opa, what are you seeing?" And he said, "I see 500 Englishmen marching onto us. They're on horses and they've got lances." And of course the Boers were really respectful of the cavalry. And he said, "Opa, is that a lot of people?" He says, "Yes, I think we're in trouble." The young guy said to his opa, "Then dan gaan ons vanmiddag lang besig wees." So if you talk about the outcome of Angola, they took us a long time, but we got through it in a good shape. So the first thing that we need to remember, and I'm ending with this, the Cuban and FAPLA offense had failed. This is an incontestable truth. Irrespective of what the Cubans are saying, irrespective of what is in the media nowadays, they failed. Why? The Cubans tried to save face and boost their demoralized troops by claiming loudly that they had won the battle for Whitaker. Those of you that were there will know it's a lie, which they claimed to have successfully defended against the South African attacks. Throughout the campaign, the South Africans, mindful of the fact that they were involved in an undeclared war, and that's a characteristic of modern warfare, is that wars don't get declared anymore. That means people have deniability, and that gives rise to massive propaganda events. So mindful of the fact that they were involved in an undeclared war, the South Africans had to refrain from making any public statements on the progress of the war. So at home, nobody actually knew what was happening in the beginning. This gave the Cubans and the Angolans the advantage in the propaganda war, which they used. The SADF could not reveal that it only had a small combat force of less than 3,000 likely armed troops in Angola. You'll remember that the tanks got involved only later on in the campaign, and it was never more than 2 squadrons. So the South Africans couldn't reveal their force levels because that would have revealed the weakness to the enemy, and the superior planning and tactics of the SADF had convinced the Cubans and Angolans that they were facing a large, heavily armed force. Read the media, you'll see some of the messages coming through now of veterans like us now talking what they experienced in there. As Chester Crocker later wrote, in early October the Soviet FAPLA offensive was smashed at the Lombard River near Mavinga. It turned into a headlong retreat over the 120 miles back to the primary launching point at Whitaker. In some of the bloodiest battles of the entire Soviet Civil War, Angolan Civil War, a combined force of some 8,000 UNITA fighters and 4,000 plus minus 4,000 SADF troops, this is Chester Crocker saying this, destroyed one Fopla brigade initially and mauled several others out of a total Fopla force of some 18,000 engaged in the three-pronged offensive of 87. Estimates of Fopla losses ranges upwards of 4,000 killed and wounded in those months. And this offensive had been a Soviet conception from the start to the finish. Senior Soviet officers played a central role in the execution. Over 1,000 Soviet advisors were assigned to Angola in 1987 to help with Moscow's largest logistical effort to date in Angola. Roughly $1.5 billion in military hardware was delivered in 1987 alone. Huge quantities of Soviet equipment were destroyed or fell into UNITA and South African Defence Force hands when Fopla broke into a disorganized retreat. And in 1987, the 1987 military campaign represented a stunning humiliation for the Soviet Union, its arms, and its tragedy. And you'll remember, 2 years after that, the wall fell. So all of this built up. I'm not making the statement this morning that the South African army was part and parcel of the falling of the wall, but it was the demise of the Soviet Union. It would take Fopla a year or maybe two to recover and regroup. Moreover, the Angolan military disaster threatened to go from bad to worse. As of mid-November, the UNITA SADF force had destroyed the Whitaker airfield and pinned down thousands of Fopla's best remaining units, clinging onto defensive perimeters. The results of the campaign at the end of the hostilities were as follows: 4,785 killed on the Cuban Fopla side that we know of, 94 tanks and hundreds of combat vehicles destroyed. South Africans lost 31 dead, killed in action, 3 tanks destroyed, 11 SADF armored cars and troop carriers lost. A total of 9 MiGs were destroyed and only 1 South Mirage was shot down. So after 13 years in Angola, the Cubans had still not achieved their aim of destroying UNITA and marching into Namibia as liberators, and they never will. They had badly underestimated the South Africans and discovered to their cost that they were facing highly trained, battle-hardened troops. You remember the young guy on the copy? He was from Bezegees vandaag. So strategically, the outcome ensured the end of hostilities and led to Namibia's free and fair election. Was it worth the effort? Well, my opinion is no life lost is worth any effort. However, the campaign directly led to the Soviets cutting funding to the Cuban support. The Cubans were given a reason to withdraw, very cleverly so, by the South Africans, and Namibia gained independence. In closing, I want to refer you to a letter written by a Lieutenant Reggie Kentish of the 1st Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers in 1899, in a letter to his parents wrote from here, and he wrote it from South Africa. And I quote, I don't think the Boers will have a chance, even although I expect there will be 1 or 2 stiff little shows here and there. I think they're awful idiots to fight, although we are of course very keen that they should. So in closing, I want to say to you, I guess we, the offspring of those Boers, of those awful fighting idiots, continue to be awful idiots. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louis. As a token of our appreciation, I request the Provincial Adjutant, Master Sean Booth, to present Colonel Retired Louis Skeepers with a certificate of appreciation. And may I also just add that most of the things that Louis told you here today, he heard in the pub at Marshall Smuts on a Friday night, so it's not as though he knew all these things by himself. While I was sitting in front here, I thought about it earlier this morning and then I forgot about it, but there are 2 people definitely missing from this parade today that were still here last year. That is Martha Smith with his video camera, and the provincial Bible, Mosdupi, used to be in charge at the back there. We will remember them.
We will remember them.
I now request Moff Padre Errol Sadler, MMM, to perform the religious ceremony. Civilian gentlemen to remove and replace headgear on commands of the Parade Sergeant Major. Thank you, Padre.
Thank you. Will you please be upstanding? Let us pray. O God, whose mercies cannot be numbered, accept our prayers and thoughts this day on behalf of all who fought in the various border campaigns. Ons onthou met danksegging al die wat langs ons geveg het en gedien het. Ons bid vandag vir hul families en vriende, vir al die martelare, as ook vir die wat veilig thuis gekom het. En nou dank ons U, want U het ons geroep om in die voetstappe van die heiliges op aarde te volg, totdat ons saam met die wat ons voorgegaan het, volgens U beloftes, saam met hulle 'n deel van U ewige koninkryk dien. Here, uit genade, hoor ons gebed. Will you please be seated? One of the books in the Bible, or let me put it this way, the Apocrypha, those extra-canonical books that interest one, is a book of the Wisdom of Solomon. And in chapter 3 we read, "The souls of the righteous are in the hand of God, and no torment will ever touch them. In the eyes of the foolish, they seem to have died, and their departure was thought to be an affliction. And their going from us to be their destruction. But they are at peace." It is hard to believe that another year has passed since we last gathered here to remember the border campaigns that were once part of our lives. It is not simply a case of it being a reunion, as some think, but rather it is a time in which we pay our respects to the memory of all who fought in these campaigns, and especially those who paid the supreme price. This past year we have seen a number of our fellow moths who played their part in the various actions answer the sunset call. There have also been many others who, for whatever reason, did not join the order and are now slowly but surely passing from this world, a world of strife and unrest. There are also many others who are now facing the close of their own lives as their bodies may be riddled with cancer or suffering from chronic heart or lung diseases, or are mentally challenged and are in the twilight existence of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease. And so we can go on. I often visit homes of deceased, where the first thing that catches one eye is a framed photo of a young man in uniform. A photo that one can see has been there for many years, often by the dust that surrounds it. A photo that is so often displayed on the sheet handed out at the funeral with pride. But there is also another side to this observance in so many cases, and that is of one's fit and strong young men returning home suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome and not having received the care that was required, as it at that time was somewhat of a mystery, and the sufferer was all too ashamed to speak out about his or her affliction. These problems are not new. They can be traced back into biblical times, into that section of the Apocrypha in the book of 1 and 2 Maccabees, to the 400-odd year period between the end of the Old Testament, the book of Nehemiah, and the start of the New Testament, of many wars that were fought by the Greek forces as they crushed Egypt, Assyria, and the Hittites, and many others. And so began what was known as the Ptolemaic Empire. Enemy armies were broken in body and mind in these clashes, and they were simply discarded. They were abused, and the many died in absolute poverty and recluseness. In about 190 BC, Judas Maccabeus, a Jewish priest, and his friends set about harassing the Greeks, killing their officers, political members and sympathizers, all those who had gained from corruption, graft, theft, jealousy, and hatred. This civil unrest led to Rome eventually invading and taking over the eastern Mediterranean. And for his work, Judas Maccabeus was hung on a cross in the year 160 BC. The last of the Ptolemies was Cleopatra, the pharaoh, the last pharaoh of Egypt. And we all know the stories of her endeavors to seduce the Roman generals and others in order to save her own life and those who were close to her. And so, my friends, what has changed in the world over the past 2,000 odd years? Wars are still being fought with weapons of unequal destruction. People are still abused and starved, as in the Maccabean era. Nowadays, interrupted power generation and high prices are a good way of forcing the populace to negatively react and to band together. Life simply becomes untenable for the majority. Is this what so many men and women fought for? Is this the freedom and peace that has been sought after for thousands and thousands of years? Peace is still a long way off, or until we too breathe our last and enter into that eternal rest and the promise that was made 2,000 years ago. In the words, trust in God, trust also in me. For in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. And I go to prepare a place for each of you. That is the Christian hope. That is also the hope of various other religions that believe in the hereafter. But it is personal, and we are also warned to be prepared. We do not know the time nor the place when our earthly lives will end. Yes, we went through various times during our service up north. Some were fun-filled. Many were harrowing and perhaps frightening. Sometimes we were in the dark as to what was actually taking place. And in the submarine service, normally it was only the officer commanding, the executive officer and the navigating officer who knew where the boat was going and the details necessary to achieve the objectives. For the crew, it was simply known as a magical mystery tour. And if we embarked a group from Langebaan, they all knew that there would be times of little sleep and lots of hard work. Yesterday I looked at a photograph of the crew of one of the submarines taken shortly before a patrol. Of the 52 crew, 70% have now gone to their eternal rest. Now, may the souls of all who fought and died in and after the border campaigns rest in peace, and through the mercy of Almighty God, rise in glory. Let us listen to the band as they play Amazing Grace. Thank you, Tony, and members of the band, for that haunting rendering of Amazing Grace. En nou, my broers en susters, die vrede van God, wat alle menslike begrippe te bowe gaan, bewaar die harte en gedagtes en die kennis en liefde van Almagtige God, onze Here. En mag die Seun van God, die Almagtige, met u wees en met u altyd bly. Amen.
Right, on, caps.
Thank you, Padre Stadler. Unfortunately for you, Padre, like me, you've also become furniture at this parade. But thank you. Lovely message, and again, beautiful rendition by the pipe band of Amazing Grace, especially. Thank you, Pipe Major Tony, and to all of the band members. You are all requested to stand for the sounding of the last post and 2-minute silence, followed by the sounding of the reveille. All veterans salute on the command veterans salute, and the salute will be terminated on the command drop salute. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand.
Banner party, be upstanding. Banner party, 18.
Parade! 18, chant!
Banner party, mount banners.
Lower the mosque flag and banners!
Banner party, lower banner.
Sound the last post! National salute! Chant!
Banner party, mount banners.
Thank you. You may be
Raise the
seated.
white flag! Alright, stand at ease. Stand at ease. Stand easy.
Let's not banners. Banner party. Stand at ease. Stand easy.
On behalf of the Memorable Order of Tenets, Deputy Provincial Elbow, Cape Western Provincial Dugout, Matriki de Wet.
Lost the offended! Lost 18, run! Lost, salute! Lost, salute! Lost, stand at ease! Stand easy, be seated!
On behalf of the Memorable Order of Tenets Women's Auxiliary, Western Province, Dugout, Provincial Lady Billy, Rene Rossi. On behalf of the Transvaal Scottish Regimental Association, Sergeant Major Carl Garner. On behalf of the Special Forces Association, 4th Cape of Good Hope Branch, Mr. Johan Hegter. On behalf of the 32 Battalion Veterans Association, Mr. Louis Schiepers. behalf of the 6-1 Recognized Veterans Association, Mr. Dennis Kwani. On behalf of the 3-1 Battalion Veterans Association, Mr. or Moff Dion van der Berg. On behalf of the Signals Association, Western Cape, Mr. Dennis de Beer. On behalf of the Kuput Veterans Association, Mr. Andre, better known as Fine Pina. Those members from the public wishing to place a floral tribute may now step forward. Flowers are available at the memorial wall. Thank you, Sergeant Major. I now call on Moff Derek Berry, Cape Western Provincial Old Bull, to read the Moff Credo in prayer.
Moth and Moth will be abstaining.
Only Moff and Mothra are to follow the Sergeant Major's commands.
Moth and Moth are 18. Good.
No little child will ever starve or suffer needless pain. The aged will live their twilight years in sunshine and not in rain. The crippled we will help to walk. The blind we will help to see. The wonders of God's handiwork in all its majesty. to feed, to clothe, to build again where hopes should shattered be. This is the crowning moth ideal to help humanity. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today. Their gift was great, but you must give a greater to complete the plan. They died now, you must nobly live to make man brother unto man. I shall pass through this world but once. Any good thing I can do, or kindness I can show any human being, let me do it now and not defer it, for I shall not pass this way again. Must salute! They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Drop salute.
What? Walker, stand at ease. Stand easy. Be seated.
You are now all requested to stand for the playing of the national anthem. All members in uniform and those wearing appropriate headdress are to salute for the national anthem. The salute is commenced on the command national salute and terminated on the command parade attention. Please stand.
All right, eight there. Set. Veteran, salute.
Please remain standing while the standard bearer party depart from the parade.
One, two, three, one. Left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left,
Thank you. You may be seated. Let's give a round of applause for the Cape Town Caledonia Pride Band. Ladies and gentlemen, this almost concludes the memorial parade for today. Before we are relieved from fatigue and dismissed by the Sergeant Major, may I thank you once again for your attendance. And to those who have travelled from far, please travel back safely. We look forward to seeing you all again next year. Before I conclude, just one last message. On the 21st of April 2021, Dawn Patrol Shell stole a cannonball from High Shell Marshal Smuts. I see this cannonball is now on display with a plaque mounted with the date it was stolen, and we are referred to as General Smuts Shell. So Sergeant Major, may we still please just find these stupid southern suburbs, because they obviously don't know that Jan Smuts died as a marshal, field marshal actually, and not as a general. So please, you may keep the cannonball, we don't want it back, especially with that tag that you've added to it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you again next year.
Wow, what an awesome parade. The first Border Boys parade I've attended, although it was the 20th annual parade held by the Dawn Patrol Moth Shellhole. And congratulations to them on a wonderful outing. Also, thanks to all the other Moth Shellholes that took part, all the other veterans that took part. Without you, it couldn't have been possible. And I think similar to the whole purpose of the legacy videos, these parades preserve our veterans' legacy. Thank you very much. Enjoy the video, and until we meet again.